we will get started, and I'll start slowly because I do know that people are still coming online. But welcome everybody to our Women in Research Small Wins series. And today we're going to talk about making a difference. So we're going to talk about impact. And we're going to talk about impact beyond academic impact. So those of you who came to our last Women in Research seminar, we actually talked about impact from an academic perspective. So we looked at things like citations and academic reputation and so on. But today we're going to look at a different sort of impact. And I think we are ready to roll. Just looking at the participants. So I am going to talk about our plan for today. So the usual housekeeping applies, and don't hesitate to contact our support team through the chat function. I always encourage people to just try not to multitask. I can see Stacey was juggling a baby, so I guess that qualifies as multitasking. But do try to, give yourself some time just by focusing on the talk. I'd like to acknowledge that we here in Western Australia are on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. What we'll do today is I will share about 20 minutes of thoughts around impact, try and draw on research when I can. I didn't find a great amount. And then I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you today to ARC Laureate Fellow Professor Kliti Grice from Curtin, another ARC Laureate Fellow at Curtin, which is fantastic, and also ARC Centre Director, Professor Janine Baxter, who's joined us before, and absolutely delighted to have her back. Just to remind you, you can submit questions via Slido. So you just go to slido.com and then you put in the hashtag WinR, or you can, of course, just pop them into the chat. So let's talk about impact. And what you can see here is all sorts of impact. And last time, as I mentioned, we focused on academic impact. And I was going to ask, who can remember any tips from our session last time on academic impact? And if you can remember anything that stuck in your brain from that session, because it was a whole month ago now, pop it in the chat just to share with other people. One of the things that I remember from that session was Professor Tamara Davis, who's an ARC Laureate Fellow, saying, do great research. If you want to have academic impact, do great research. And I think that's something that we can easily forget when we get caught up in the numbers and the citations and so on. But fundamentally, that's a great precursor to having academic impact. And just to remind you that if you didn't see it, we have that available. You can go on there and get some tips about how to build that stronger academic profile. But today we are talking about non-academic impact. There's a lot of definitions. It's actually a very hotly contested topic because, as we'll talk about, there's been a lot of interest from the public and from funding agencies and so on as to this question of impact. Here's one definition, but as I say, there are lots. That it's a demonstrable contribution, so it's something you can demonstrate, that excellent research makes to society and the economy that is of benefit to individuals, organisations and nations. So that's a very broad definition. Hopefully by the end of today, you've mulled over some of the ways that impact is important in your particular discipline. But I think I want to start with why should we care? Well, first of all, collectively, there's just been a big move, and in Australia we've witnessed that, and I think it's been already happening in the UK for many years, and I know that it will happen in other countries as well if it hasn't already. Because research is often publicly funded, there is this focus on you should justify that that investment was worthwhile. So there's a sort of return on investment type of argument here. And so, of course, as funding gets more and more tight and difficult, that pressure gets greater. I think another sort of collective argument for why should we care about impact beyond academia is we know that a lot of the decisions that are made in policy or even in practice, things like medicine, social work, management, actually are not the best decisions. And if we drew on research and evidence, we'd get those better quality decisions. So that's another really important argument for why impact matters, is let's use research to make the world better. I think personally, of course, impact is important because it very much does connect to funding and increasingly even promotions and things like that. You know, there is an opportunity to share the impact that you're having as part of the criteria. And again, I would add, a bit like with academic impact, talked about this, but from a personal meaning perspective, many people go into research because they do want to make a difference to the world. And so actually doing that and having that impact, you know, can be a really strong source of personal meaning in our jobs. And of course, a little bit of variety. And maybe there are other reasons that impact is important that you want to note. So why, what are the models for thinking about impact? And there are many. I just want to highlight, there's sort of, in the literature, there's sort of two perspectives, I guess, and they're both relevant. The first one is that top one, and these authors call it performance sort of models of impact. And these models say impact is the end game. Impact is the actual results or effect that you have on society and the economy. And so, you know, do you actually change policy or influence policy? Do you shape the impact of services that are delivered? Do you change knowledge and discussions in society? Do you impact health? Do you shape culture and art, etc.? Now, so that's very much a like, what results do you have model? And you can see there are several different models that fit into that. The payback framework, for example, is pretty obvious. That's about how do you pay back. But the other sort of model are more process models of impact. And what, so as an example, you can see there, I've said it as an example, contribution mapping. These sorts of models of impact focus a little bit more on not so much the end result, but the process of the research. And are you in the process of research actually engaging stakeholders and co-producing knowledge? And I guess the researchers that often focus on these sorts of models often will be in those fields where it's very difficult to sort of prove, you know, that you've had this ultimate impact because so many forces perhaps influence it. And so therefore, and often in these very complex humanities, social science type problems, the key focus then might be not so much on I'm going to prove that we changed X, but I'm going to prove that we worked together with stakeholders and created useful knowledge for those stakeholders. So two different sorts of models there. So here is an example of a little bit more that process model. So engaging stakeholders, and think about your own research. Do you engage stakeholders? And I'm not saying you should, by the way, just to be clear, but some researchers, particularly with that co-development model, do you involve stakeholders in the project development, the design? Do you involve them in, you know, how in the doing of the project? Are they partners? Are you involving them in getting the results out there? So disseminating, you might engage you know, big government agencies, for example, who disseminate the research. And then, of course, are those outputs being used and built into training and so on? So that's one simple model. I just wanted to share this, and this comes from the Australian Research Council website. I think this is a useful way to think about it, because what this model does, I guess, it combines those two ideas. So it combines the processes, or here they're referred to as activities, with the outcomes or the benefits or the results that you're trying to create. And the idea with this model is we think about what sort of inputs we have. We get money, we've got staff, we've got IP, you know, and then we look at, well, what activities do we engage in? We organise conferences, we've got facilities that we use, you know, we engage with the stakeholders, engage with community. What outputs does that lead to? Well, we get stories in the newspaper, we influence policy briefings, etc. What are the ultimate outcomes of those inputs? So, okay, well, that might actually lead to new companies or jobs being created or whatever. And then what is the benefit ultimately of that for society? Mapping it out like that can actually just be quite useful for you to think about where you want to focus. So that's a lot of different ideas about impact. I quite like this quote from Professor Mark Reed, who wrote the book, The Research Impact Handbook. He said, you know, keep asking who benefits and how, and you will find the impact. So that's really what we're talking about in a nutshell. Who benefits from your research and how do they benefit? Mark says, people regularly ask me, when does the pathway to impact stop? So when does that first part stop? That's the pathway. And when does the impact begin? And he says, well, the answer is that the impact starts when you see benefits. So if that sort of discussion of impact that I've just given there, you know, is in any way confusing you, maybe come back to this. Impact starts when you see benefits, and those benefits can be of many different types. Now, if you really want to get into this, the UK, as I mentioned before, has been doing this for years, and you can literally go, you can Google something like UK impact case studies, because universities have had to create case studies of their impact that they've then been evaluated on. And here's just a random set of examples. You know, holding the UK government to account over arms export policy. And then, you know, you would click on that and you can see the story, and they really are stories of how that impact was achieved. And then you can see a different one here, the third one, highlighting the health issues of high sodium medicines. Completely different field, but again, you know, how was that impact made, and so on. So lots of examples, and I recommend, if you're wanting to really ramp this bit up in your research, go on to those UK websites and you can look at examples in your field just to get some nice ideas. Lots of ways of measuring impact, and you know, we'd get a bit obsessed around measurement in universities, unfortunately. But what you can see here from this piece of research is they analysed lots and lots of impact studies, and then they looked at what methods were used to measure impact. You can see the number one thing is interviews. So interviewing people who say, you know, it was a great impact and this is why. But case studies as well. And I'm sure that comes from the influence of the UK, because that's the focus that they use. Could be surveys, could be peer or expert reviews, could be statistics, commercialisation statistics, bibliometrics. I'm seeing more and more, and I did quite a lot of searching to find examples of things like how many times your name is mentioned on a Google website that's not an education Google website. So there's all those sorts of metrics emerging. I'm sure that we'll be increasingly expected to demonstrate impact with them, and you can see others there as well. I just want to share, and I'll just take another 5 minutes. You know, how do we create and show impact? And our guest visitors are going to give examples and share their thoughts on this topic. But what should be completely obvious from everything I've said so far is there is no one size fits all. It really is about thinking about what's relevant for you, your discipline, your topic. In some cases, it might be changing the conversation. You know, that could be a really important impact. And we can think of lots of examples around the world of where changing the conversation would be very powerful. In other cases, it might be a product, or it might be educating. You know, we all educate people. That can be a really powerful form of impact, and so on. So there's no one size fits all. So have a think about what impact model makes sense for your research. Who are your stakeholders? Is it more about the process of research, or is it more about the shaping of the outcomes, or is it both? Can you create an impact map, a bit like that one I showed you? How would you measure impact? Could you do that before you start your research? These are the things that it might help to think about. Really important question. What impact is feasible for you given your career stage, resources and opportunities? So the three of us today are going to share some examples of our impact. But you need to remember that we are at an advanced career stage and most of us have got quite a lot of resources. So you should be realistic in what's appropriate for you. In my research on this topic, you know, you can get these virtuous circles between academic and non-academic impact. But quite a few studies were actually saying to me, be careful not to go too far. If you're in the early career stage, because, for example, citations, academic citations, and we talked about last time how important those are, actually do not correlate very well with the REF, that's the UK system, impact results. Citations, academic citations, do not correlate very well with the altmetrics, which is a form of measuring non-academic impact, or tweets. And here's an example study. So don't try not to work backwards where you're focusing on the impact to the neglect of your academic research, because there could be some risks with that. Facebook likes of an article, we all like to see them. If we use Facebook or LinkedIn, they're great, but they do not predict academic impact in many fields. Another study there. And again, I gave the example of impact being measured through non-EDU Google pages, but citations, academic citations, do not correlate well with that. Although, interestingly, non-EDU Google pages, if anyone is interested, do correlate with speaker fees. So if you are someone who likes to do public speeches, if you've got a lot of non-EDU Google pages, you should be able to attract higher fees. There you go. So, what I'm really saying with this one here is, you know, be careful, be considered, I guess, about your approach to impact, because we're all overloaded and trying to do too many things. So just be a little bit aware. I won't talk about strategies because I know that Janine is going to cover some of those a little bit later, and you've got the slides and I've got the blog there that you can come back to. The last point I want to make before I just share with you some of the things that I've done with my team here to create impact is I just want to make this point about ensuring high quality research underpins your impact. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Professor Amy Cuddy, who is the person behind the power poses. So if you're not familiar, what she showed in her research is if you do this power pose like this, you know, it increases your sense of confidence, and it even changes the hormones in your body. So she did this research, I think maybe 1 or 2 studies, not a big program. And then she went on to TED.com and she became one of the most popular speakers of all time. But then what happened is that I think maybe partly because she was a woman, but she attracted so much attention, it had so much impact, that then people really went after her with the research. And there was sort of literally decades of criticism about her research, and and arguments that it don't hold and all this sort of thing. And I have to say the most recent evidence that I read, just in case you're interested, is that actually a big meta-analysis suggests that it's not so much the power pose actually that changes things. What she compared the power pose to sort of hunching down and looking, and it's actually the hunching down that's negative impact on your confidence rather than but anyway, it looks like there was certainly evidence underpinning what she did, but perhaps not as strong and as clear as the TED Talk implied. And I just wanted to share that as a little bit of a warning again about, do the research, have the research first before the impact. I just want to now share a couple of minutes on some of the things that we've done in our team. So we do research on work. So we try to influence work practice. If anyone's interested, I'll actually put that article where we spell out, Karina, Grice and myself, we sort of spell out how we've done that consistently over decades, or tried, I should say, tried to have impact consistently over decades. But we've done things like create little acronyms of our ideas just to convey them more simply. One of the things we've been really trying to do is change the conversation. So, I said before that can sometimes be a powerful form of impact. So in the mental health space, for example, we developed a Thrive at Work model. We developed it because we wanted to change the conversation away from focusing on mental health at work as being, the problem of a mentally unwell person who comes to work and let's support them and so on, which is important, to saying, how do we design healthy work? How do we actually create healthy work? So that was an example. And I have to say that our Thrive website, Isabel could tell you exactly, but we have had a huge amount of engagement. So I think we have started to shift the conversation, but we didn't measure the conversation at the beginning, so I can't tell you exactly. And there's a lesson. We also tried to influence policy through being on, national bodies or trying to influence codes of practice and so on and so forth. And we do try to influence the general public by writing in outlets like The Conversation and Harvard Business Review and those sorts of outlets that are picked up by the general public. But I just did want to share with you one of the things that we've done, which I've enjoyed the most in this impact space, and that has been to sketch work design, because we have this challenge of how do we convey what it is that we do. So one of the things that we did was took an artist into workplaces, and we sketched more than 45 different workplaces and interviewed people at the same time. So you can see here, here's an aged care assistant talking about her compassion and how we help each other and so on. And here's a shearer talking about, his work and so on. So we have those coupled with stories. We also, just as an aside, we also did a sketching competition, and we called for sketches from across the world. And here you can see some Indian market women working and talking about, we attract customers with the language of love, but beautiful examples of work from all over the world. And this one right in the bottom left-hand corner actually was the winner of that. And you can just see a tiny slice there. But this was about the work of some people in the Queensland Museum and what their job was all about. So that's a little bit of a different strategy, but I thought I would share it. And I will conclude now before we go to our speakers. I love this quote from Helen Keller, and I try to, this is the small wins concept, but in the space of impact, many of you are early career, something small. The world is moved along not only by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but also by the aggregate of tiny pushes of each honest worker. So I think small is a great start in the impact space. So with Oh, I don't know why, Janine, your photo has disappeared from this slide, but you can see Janine on the screen. Absolutely delighted to have two wonderful people. First, we'll hear from ARC Centre Director Janine Baxter from the University of Queensland. And she's been the director of the, whoops, should have turned my phone off, shouldn't I? Of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Families and Children over the life course. Then we will hear from ARC Laureate Fellow Kliti, Grice. And so we go to completely different sort of discipline. And she is a geochemist. So we'll hear a little bit more about impact from a STEM perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will go to Janine. So thank you so much, Janine.
Thank you, Sharon. Lovely to be here again. And I think, I was thinking as you spoke, Sharon, these webinars are a form of impact that you in particular, but that we're having on the research community. So congratulations to you and your team. Yes, I don't have any slides. I'm just going to try and talk not too long, but this is a topic I was particularly interested to just to be involved in because as a centre director, this is something we think about a lot in our centre. So we are focused on how we reduce social disadvantage for children and families in Australia. We want to influence social policy. We want to improve the lives of those who are living in disadvantage. And we want to shape the discourse and change the discourse and really reduce the stigma around social disadvantage, so that it's not seen as an individual problem that people have created for themselves, but it's something about their social position and, the structure of society. So, yeah, there's a lot of forms of impact that we're trying to have in our centre. It's a big multidisciplinary centre, and so impact is a big part of our agenda and what we worry about and try to achieve. So I've got some just random dot points, but, as Sharon has said, the landscape in the higher education system has changed. We are very much in what you might call, we've moved away from just a sole focus on excellence of research in the academic sector to a bit more of a focus on excellence and impact. So do the research, but also make sure you don't forget about the impact, as Sharon has said. And you can trace this back, if you look back at the higher education policy, you can trace this right back, kind of really began, I guess, in about 2015, 2014, it was starting to be talked about. But even last year, the Federal Minister for Education, Alan Tudge, was saying, we want and need our universities to play a bigger role, to not just produce brilliant, pure research, but to work with business and government to translate this research into breakthrough products, new businesses, new ideas to grow our economy and strengthen our society. So it's really front and centre of higher education policy. And although we've had a change of government with the election, I don't see the impact agenda going away. It's really here with us. It began long before the last government, and I think it will continue on with the current government. And so the ARC has been one of the agencies that the government has tasked with assessing impact, and we had our first big assessment, our engagement and impact assessment back in 2018. And if you go to the ARC website, you can see the report that came out of that, where they assessed what impact university research is having. And the next one is scheduled for 2024. So probably at your university, but at mine, we're starting to think about, what will be our case studies, how will we prepare for this next big impact assessment. So it's important to you as researchers, but it's important to universities and higher education. It's really where we're at the moment. So I wanted to kind of, think about, well, what does this mean for you, particularly if you're an early career researcher? What does it mean for you and your research? And so I've got some random points. But of course, it's no longer sufficient, as Sharon said, just to build your academic CV with good publications and not to think about the strategies to translate your results into real world outcomes of some sort. When I first started in academia, it probably was quite different, I'd say. It was enough, I think, get your CV, get those really good high quality publications, attract grant funding, and you don't really have to worry about the next steps. But, that's definitely changed. And I think promotion committees, to get further grant funding, you've really got to show or try to show the impact that you're having, or all the strategies you've got for having impact. And there's a lovely quote from Barbara Pocock, which I'll just read out briefly. She is a social scientist in Adelaide. She's now an newly elected senator. And she says, many researchers take the J.D. Salinger approach to publication. That is, they pack their academic article, put it on a bus and send it out into the world to find its own readership and effect. But of course, not all research products are the social science equivalent of Catcher in the Rye, and many of them sink without a trace. So we can't take the J.D. Salinger approach. We can't just do our research and send it off and hope for impact. So what are some of the strategies? And here I'm drawing on some of the things that we've been doing in my centre, and I'm happy to talk about them more in the questions. So I think right from the get-go, when you're designing a research project, you have to think about what impact you're aiming for. Don't just leave this to the Salinger approach. Think about impact right from the beginning. If you can, I think try and develop a research translation plan that thinks about the connections between the outputs, which might be publications, and the outcomes, which might be a change in policy or a change in someone's life. And that plan might include communication strategies. It might include, as we will see from Kliti in a moment, other kinds of communication like art and videos and so on. But think about what your translation plan is. Think about who you need to engage with to undertake the translation plan. As researchers, we'll have very strong skills around doing our research. That's what we're trained to do, but we're not typically trained to do translation. So you might need to include in your grant application or in your repertoire of people that you work with, communications experts, graphic designers, industry stakeholder partners. In our case, they're a very important part of our translation plan to help you move from outputs to outcomes and implement the findings. Or it might be community members. So it might be people whose lives you're trying to change. And a community reference group is something that we have in the centre to think about, what's going to be the impact of our research on the community that we're trying to, to work with. Engage with these people, whether it be graphic designers, community policymakers, in the design phase. So don't plan the research and get it organised and funded and then think, oh, who am I going to talk to about getting this out there? Try and bring in those people at the beginning, because you might have a great research idea from an academic point of view and a methodological point of view. You might have great data, but they may not be particularly interested in it. And it's almost too late at the end to then go and say, hey, I've got this great finding. How can we translate it? So try and bring them in at the beginning if you can. So reference groups, stakeholders, forums where you pitch your ideas, trial your ideas before you write your application or develop your research. In the centre, one of the things we often do is run roundtables and forums. And again, these are things that you can do with colleagues and, particularly if you're a senior person. If you're a junior person, all of these things need to be, applied given your career stage. And I'll talk more about that if you want. But I recognise that it's not easy as an ECR just to reach out and bring in stakeholders to a forum. But there are ways that you can work with your senior colleagues to do that. I think it took me quite a while to work out the difference between communication and translation. And so don't confuse the two. And I think, again, we're trained as researchers to be communicators, to deliver our conference papers, to write well. Communication is becoming part of our training, and that's something we do with our PhD students in the centre. But that's not necessarily translation. And so communication might be part of a translation plan, but it's not the end point. So I think there is often a tendency to think, and I've seen this in grant applications that I've written and that I've read of others, I've got a plan to hold a workshop, with partners or stakeholders, but that's not really enough. That's a starting point, but you need to think about, can you take it further than that? And then just finally, I think I'm speaking very much from someone who's had, 30 years of academic and research experience. I mean, I think all of these things are a little bit different if you're an ECR. So cold calling potential stakeholders, partners as an ECR is very difficult and not likely to work. So I think one of the things, if you are an ECR, is to start talking to your senior colleagues about how they can help you with some of your translation plans. Whether you can work with your university research office, for example, or other parts of the university, whether it be the communication office, the media office. Maybe there are small grants you can apply for to help you run some of these forums and workshops. At UQ, we've recently we've moved from an early career researcher grant to what's now called a knowledge exchange and communication grant. And they're grants, small pots of money for ECRs to apply for, to kind of bring those stakeholders together at the beginning of a research project. So sometimes universities, I think because of the impact agenda and what I said before about the higher education policy, are putting in place mechanisms and infrastructure that can help you think about translation, because universities want you to be able to translate your research as well. So I'll stop there. I'm conscious that I want to leave plenty of time for questions and also for Kliti to talk about her ideas. So I'll hand back to Sharon or straight on to Kliti.
Yeah, thanks so much, Janine, and some fantastic tips there, about the importance of thinking about this early. Yeah, I think is really key. And I also love your distinction between communication and translation. There's a real art to translation. And thinking about who might help with that is really important. So thank you so much. Let's go now to Kliti. If you can begin sharing your tips, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Janine, for very insightful summary of what impact means and how it can be done. What I'm going to just briefly talk about for 5 or 6 minutes is how what tools I've used to get impact of my research and my research team. So just to start off, I'll just briefly explain what I actually do, so then you can see why I've used some of the approaches to get the impact of the research. So I work on organic molecules in rocks and sediments to investigate big catastrophic events, mass extinction events of life on Earth, so over 600 million years, so it's like massive timescale. And we've been working on the big 5 mass extinction events. And you might have heard of the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago, when a meteorite or an asteroid struck the Gulf of Mexico. So we've been working on these kind of things, big problems in the past. And we also work on molecules in really well-preserved fossils, which have got soft tissue, and these are entombed in large boulders or concretions. And this is an untapped resource of evolutionary insights. So a lot of the information that we obtain is reconstructing ancient environments and looking at things that existed or which might have gone extinct. So to give an impression of what those organisms might have been like, or those environments, we use artistic illustrations to get that message across to the community or to grant funding bodies, for public lectures, for brochures, for media releases, to get traction with whole host of different people, including the public. So I've got some examples here of the sorts of illustrations that this one was used in my ARC Laureate application.
Sorry, Kliti, to interrupt you. I've just seen a message that people can't see the full screen. Isabel, I'm not sure if you can do that. I think we can see the screen, but I'm not sure other people can see the screen. Oh, some people can. Some people can. We're good. We're good. Sorry to interrupt you, Kliti. Continue. I just wanted to check because these visualizations are so amazing. I want people to see them. Yes, yeah. We're good. Okay. Keep going.
Yeah, so this first one is just sort of some concepts which was put into the Laureate application. The second one here is a summary of how that, you know, what was done, what will be done in that project, and how we can obtain new knowledge. And these I think actually help grant applications. The next one is, if you move the slide on, is this one is a really nice. On the right here, we've got what information we might have obtained from geologic samples from molecules. So things like massive changes in carbon dioxide triggered by volcanic activity. We have low oxygen conditions and acidification in oceans. We have evidence of things like extinction of corals and that kind of thing. What is on the left here is sort of the what we find in the past is a key to the present. So this is a really nice illustration of how our research can be translated into what we're seeing in the modern environment. So we know all about rising CO2 and our climate and greenhouse warming caused by human activity. We've got ocean acidification there where our coral reefs have been affected, and you've got low oxygen minimum zones on continental shelves, and got natural pollution. Also got plastic in the ocean there. So this is just a nice way of illustrating some of the research and how it can be translated into the modern day. The next example is just an illustration of what we found with the asteroid impact and the changes that occurred. And you don't need to be a scientist to follow that. You can read the words and see what changes happened after the asteroid hit the Gulf of Mexico. So there's just a few examples. Other forms of communication have where we've actually taken our research, like this and Cretaceous mass extinction, the research and the findings of that research. We were interviewed by a German company that wanted to put a cartoon together, which is, I've given a link to Sharon and to Isabel, which is the day the dinosaurs died, which is a minute by minute latest results included in the story. It's about 15 minutes long, so I won't play it, but maybe you can probably listen for 1 minute of that. So if you just play it for a minute, and then if you want to listen to it in your own time, you're most welcome to. So this was actually from interview of the science, and this is on the
one of the greatest illusions in life is continuity. 66 million years ago, the continuity of the dinosaurs had been going on for around 165 million years already, and it didn't seem this would change anytime soon. The world was warm and pleasant, and most of the land was covered with lush forests and an incredible diversity of trees, flowers, ferns, and trillions of critters. Dinosaurs were ubiquitous and had diversified into hundreds of species of all shapes and sizes. Titanosaurs, large, gentle giants, shared.
But this whole story is about what happened the day the dinosaurs died, and it's got the actual facts from the science, which is really nice. And I think if you've got time to listen to it, I love this video, and it was made by this German group, and they do a lot of like videos like this on all kinds of science, and they're very enthusiastic to take science papers and put these into videos. So that's something I've used. interestingly, that video itself was within 24 hours. It was one of the most downloaded videos on YouTube, which was a massive impact for our research. Other things that I've utilised podcast interviews, which you have a general science audience and community, and they can listen to podcast interviews. So I did one for Curtin University last year, and this was about mass extinctions and whether we're going through another extinction event, and it was like a probing questions and answers, and that created a lot of interest in the community as well. Although most of that podcast was actually picked up by academics, and less interest from things like Facebook, but more so from the academic point of view. So it was quite different to the video, this cartoon video, which was picked up by school kids and things. Other forms of impact which I've been involved in are in citizen science. So we were involved in a campaign called No Plastics in the Ocean, which was led by John Sanders. He's a famous yachtsman from Perth. And this was pretty much an email came around to our faculty, and that John Sanders and his team wanted to get support to do analysis of plastics in the ocean. So I put up my hand. I offered my whole team to help with that. And what he did was a couple of years ago now, he sailed around for the 11th time the circumnavigation of the world, and we designed a filter in his boat which was able to collect microplastics from around the oceans. And this was very low key for us in terms of analytical stuff. You know, analytical methodology was quite simple. It's not something that you would have a high impact paper from. But what was really nice was that this generated a lot of media interest. It's in a lot of the newspapers over the last 3 years. We've been involved in a lot of media interviews, live radio interviews, and the impact was quite astonishing, even though we've only just got a little report which we recently put on Curtin's eSpace, and that piece of work has had more impact probably than some of the science articles that we've published. So it's really amazing, and it's got a general, you know, the impact to the public, changes in how we're dealing with plastics. This has contributed to that, you know, in a very small way, but has had major impact on society. So I think that's a good example of very simple science but massive impact. And the other sorts of things
just maybe one more, Kliti, just so we can have time for some questions.
Sure. I guess the other things that we're involved in at the moment, massive outreach activity where we're actually growing fossils in the lab, and we have high school kids coming through, and they can actually get hands-on experience of making their own fossil and taking it home, and that's going really well. So those are just, I could have got many other examples, but those are just.
Thank you so much, Kliti. I just love the innovative nature of those examples, you know, from dinosaur movies to scooping up plastic in the sea to having school kids make fossils. So I think we've seen wonderful examples from both our STEM colleagues, and also from our social science colleagues who might, you know, involve reference groups and so on and so forth. So thank you both so much. I'm absolutely delighted now to introduce Lucinda Isles, who is doing a PhD with us here. And Lucinda is going to, I think, share the results of the little survey if we had enough people do it, Lucinda. And then she's going to ask some of the questions that people in the audience have so kindly sent through to us. So over to you, Lucinda.
Thank you. Can you guys see my screen with poll results?
Yes, good.
I think they were very positive. So our first question was, I think about who benefits from or might use my research, and we had 54% agree and 38 strongly agree. and no disagrees. So everyone's already starting to think about their impact. Then we had, I take active steps to ensure my research makes a difference to society. And again, quite positive, a little bit more in the unsure category. Oh, some people are still responding, but a little bit more even there. And then finally, I feel guilty about my level of non-academic engagement and impact. And quite a few people are agreeing and feeling a bit guilty. And maybe this is a little bit of a neglected area for some of us.
And I put that in there, Lucinda, because I think as academics, and especially academic women, we do tend to beat ourselves up a lot. And so I think that yeah, it's not a good thing to feel guilty. We already all do so much, but I just encourage people to just, you know, do something small rather than beat yourself up so much. But yeah, over to you for some questions now, Lucinda.
Some of the questions that we had, and I think possibly it would be interesting to hear from all three of you. You talked a lot about kind of your later career impact that you guys have been involved in, but I wondered if you could reflect on and just share the way that your impact has evolved over the years. So what kind of things were you doing when you were an early career versus a later career researcher? Sharon, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I can't remember what I did as an early, it's so long ago. So I have to say it probably, because I think our topic is a bit confounded because it's work in companies and organizations. So you almost have to have impact in order for them to keep inviting you back. So I think that probably as an early career researcher, my impact was more local. You know, it was local to the particular companies we were working with. What I've tried to do as I've got more advanced and had more resources and things is to have wider scale impact. So I think for me, that would be the difference.
Can I just piggyback off that with another question? If you could recommend one thing for early career researchers that are in the webinar to go and do today to start thinking about how they can make impact, what would you recommend?
And I'm deflecting that one to Janine.
Well, I was going to say in my early career, I think you have to shape the impact that you can have given your career stage and what you're doing. So in my early career, I was in a TNR teaching position, and I'd say my impact then was on training students and teaching them research skills. And so it wasn't so much in the research space, it was more about the teaching and capacity building. Then as I moved more into research-only jobs, I started to think about, you know, right centre applications and so on. That was when I was able to think more broadly. So I think don't feel guilty, don't beat yourself up, but think about what am I doing now? What does my employer or the university want me to have impact on? And for some people it might be just teaching, and that's a very strong impact to have. One thing to do, I suppose, might be, well, you raised your awareness by coming to this, to think about it and to be looking around either for colleagues or university infrastructure, or, you know, what are the resources you need if you, you know, and again, it will vary depending on your career stage. So think about what do I need to have impact and start getting those in place, whether it be communication or, you know, extra funding or collaborations with people. And often impact, I think, is easier to have in collaboration. It's harder to do as an individual sole researcher.
And Kliti, did you have anything to add?
You're on mute, Kliti.
Experience is probably important. In the past, I would never do live radio interviews, absolutely petrified. And it's only this year that I did my first radio interview, even after 24 years. And I actually gained a lot of confidence from that. But in the past, I think doing these things early is really important. And even if you stuff it up, it's okay. I think it's to learn from your mistakes and to move forward and become, the more times you do it, probably the more confident you become. And I think communication through radio, media is to start early and get your work out there.
And just to go to my point about small, if you lack confidence, you could start with responding to questions to a journalist on email, which we're all comfortable with because we can carefully craft our word. And then you can progress, so you get asked, you say, only if I can do it by email. And most journalists are so desperate, they'll say yes. And then you gradually build your confidence up to those more dynamic forms that you just mentioned, Kliti.
Yeah.
Lucinda, back to you for another question.
We had quite a few questions around recording impact and metrics, and I wondered if you have a sense of whether certain types of impact are better from the university's point of view, and kind of is anecdotal type of evidence enough? How would we record these impact streams?
I'm happy to just make a comment on that. I mean, we, because impact is something we have as a KPI from the ARC, from the Australian Research Council, we do impact case studies. And I know universities do this too. So we take our big research projects and, as they're coming toward the end, we kind of map out the impact we've had and kind of document it all for ourselves and for the ARC. And so that might be looking at the number of times our reports have been cited in government reports or in Hansard. It might be the number of media reports. It might be, down to, we even had a project where we used some software to kind of analyse the number of times the word life course was used in particular government documents. So kind of really trying to map it out. It can be very hard though, and often the impact comes way down the track, and so it's, again, start small with, some of those kinds of metrics, but impact, we're trying to reduce social disadvantage in Australia. Well, that's a long-term goal.
And that's where, Janine, if I can just come in there, I talked before about measures of process versus the outcome. When you've got something so big, measuring processes like, the number of hits on your website and things like that, they're not the ultimate outcome, but they are activities that can lead to outcome. So sometimes I think for early career researchers, and particularly in those sorts of disciplines, measuring things like hits or Google's pages, etc., that, if they've got your name on it, they can be a great start. They're not the end game necessarily, but they're a great start. And Kliti, did you have any thoughts on that one?
I guess one thing which I don't quite understand myself, and that maybe this is something that Curtin could follow up, is how the media impact, it gives a dollar value, and I never really understand how that's actually translated to us, and I'd like to understand a bit more about it. It's more of a thing that I'm curious about.
I think one of the things they do is they measure this thing called advertising value equivalence, which is if you'd had that amount of space and had to pay for it as an advertisement, what would it have cost? Which is, again, it's a sort of quantification of if you get on the radio or if you get in the Australian or whatever. So yeah, Lucinda, do we have time for one more quick one, or have we run out?
There was one just in the chat that's just disappeared.
Maybe maybe just share what it was very quickly if you can find it.
Yeah, it was one for Janine from Julie. Is impact mapping done for any non-ARC projects?
Yeah, I think so, Julie. And I think, particularly with the engagement and assessment exercise that the ARC runs, that universities, have to respond to. A lot of the case studies that universities put up will be non-ARC funded projects. So yes, I think it is. I'm talking, because I'm running an ARC centre, that's kind of my framework, but I think there are examples. And the health sciences, I think, would be another area where there'd be good examples of impact, which are not so much about the kind of stuff we do in my centre, but are about, number of clinical trials or, you know, lots of other ways that you could assess it. So yes, I think it is, but I'm talking very much, because ARC is my main funder, that's kind of my focus at the moment.
Well, thank you. We will end on that note. So thank you again to Janine and Kliti, of course, the team behind that you don't see, Isabel. Thank you again, Lucinda, for your fabulous question asking. And most of all, thank you to the wonderful women and guests that we've had. I saw there was 145 at one point. So join us again. I can't remember what the next topic is, but we will let you know. And we will, of course, make this webinar available on our website for anyone who's missed it. So without further ado, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.